Chapter 1, The Beige Ultimatum. In a neighborhood designed to look like a glossy magazine ad, conformity wasn't just encouraged, it was enforced. Every house stood in a uniform palette of whites, creams, and the HOA's sacred color, beige. It was meant to reflect elegance and harmony, but to the homeowner, it looked like a cookie-cutter suburb drained of life. Beige walls, beige fences, beige doors, monotony painted across the street. It wasn't long before the homeowner's own house became the latest target of the HOA's watchful eye. A small patch of fading paint on the siding was all it took for the first letter to arrive. Violation, house color maintenance. At first, the homeowner brushed it off. After all, every house had imperfections, chips in shutters, cracked driveways, and weather-stained roofs. But ignoring the HOA was never an option. Soon came the second letter, sterner than the first. Your house must be repainted in compliance with HOA-approved colors. Approved palette attached. Stapled to the letter was a list of only 3 options: beige, light beige, and slightly darker beige. It was as if creativity itself had been outlawed. The homeowner sighed but still didn't move quickly enough for the board's liking. That's when she got involved. Karen, self-appointed enforcer of all things HOA, began appearing on the sidewalk near the house. Clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched like a crown, she scrutinized every detail. Neighbors whispered that she treated HOA rules like sacred scripture. If your grass was too long, she'd report it. If your trash can lingered at the curb for 10 extra minutes, she'd photograph it. Now, she had set her sights on the homeowner's paint. Karen's visits soon escalated into harassment. She left notes taped to the front door. She snapped pictures of the house at different times of day. She even cornered neighbors, loudly speculating about how one person's laziness could bring down property values for the entire community. For Karen, the house's fading paint wasn't just a nuisance, it was a personal battle. But the homeowner wasn't the type to surrender easily. Instead of caving to Karen's pressure, they began digging deeper into the HOA's handbook, flipping through its dense paragraphs and legal jargon late at night. Most residents never bothered reading beyond the summary, but hidden in the fine print, the homeowner discovered something intriguing. A loophole. The HOA didn't actually mandate beige, it mandated that houses be painted in neutral or non-offensive colors, a clause left intentionally vague. The seed of defiance had been planted. Karen had demanded beige, but the rules didn't explicitly require it. The homeowner smiled at the thought. Beige wasn't the only option. In fact, there was an entire spectrum of legal but shocking possibilities. The next morning, as Karen strutted down the street with her usual air of authority, the homeowner stood at the window, already picturing the transformation. They weren't going to just repaint the house. They were going to make a statement so loud, so unforgettable, that Karen, and the entire HOA, would choke on their obsession with conformity. The idea was bold. Some might even call it reckless. But after weeks of bullying and threats, the homeowner knew one thing: beige would never touch their house. Something brighter was coming. Much brighter. And as the first paint samples arrived in the mail, the plan began to take shape. Chapter 2, The Pink Plan. The paint samples spread across the homeowner's dining table looked like a rebellion waiting to happen. Most were safe shades of gray, cream, and muted blues, colors the HOA would happily approve. But tucked inside the collection was one card that seemed to glow even under the dim kitchen light: electric pink. It was outrageous. It was blinding. It was everything Karen would hate. And, more importantly, it was technically legal. The loophole was clear: the HOA rules stated only that the color must be non-offensive. The term was subjective, vague, and wide open to interpretation. The homeowner realized that what was offensive to Karen wasn't necessarily offensive in the eyes of the law. With the right paperwork and a little stubbornness, the HOA's power could crumble. The plan began to take shape. Step 1 was confirming the legality. The homeowner pored over local property codes, even calling the city planning office under the guise of considering a bold renovation. To their surprise, the city official chuckled and said, "As long as it's not neon signs or graffiti, the HOA's word isn't law. They can't override city guidelines. Step 2 was strategy. Instead of rushing headfirst into battle, the homeowner prepared the perfect cover. They filed the necessary repainting notice with the HOA, as required, but left the final color selection blank. They described the new shade as warm, welcoming, and inspired by the vibrancy of Florida sunsets. It was vague enough to sound poetic but nowhere near specific enough to raise suspicion. Meanwhile, paint supplies were ordered discreetly. Gallons of high-quality, weather-resistant pink arrived at a friend's garage across town. Brushes, rollers, tarps, and ladders were stockpiled like weapons for a coming war. Every step was planned with precision because the homeowner knew one thing for certain: once the first stroke of pink touched the siding, there would be no going back. But as preparations unfolded, Karen's presence grew more suffocating. She seemed to sense that defiance was brewing. She hovered outside the house, snapping photos of every delivery. She called city inspectors for bogus safety concerns. She even cornered the homeowner's mail carrier, demanding to know if any suspicious packages had been delivered. Her paranoia only fueled the homeowner's determination. If Karen wanted to play watchdog, she was about to witness the biggest spectacle her Beige kingdom had ever seen. Finally, the day arrived. The sky was clear, the weekend stretched ahead, and the ladders were set in place. Neighbors walked by, curious but unaware of the storm about to hit their HOA. The homeowner dipped the roller into the bucket, thick pink paint clinging to the fibers like molten fire. The first streak across the siding was shocking. Against the dull backdrop of beige homes, the hot pink blazed like a neon sign. It was bold, unapologetic, and magnificent. By sundown, half the house gleamed in vivid pink glory. Neighbors gasped, children pointed with delight, and Karen stood frozen on the sidewalk, clutching her binder as if it were the last defense against chaos. The battle lines were drawn. The Beige kingdom had been breached. And Karen, red-faced and shaking, wasn't about to let it go without a fight. Chapter 3, Karen's Meltdown. By sunrise, the house stood like a blazing beacon of defiance. The bold pink walls caught the morning light and seemed to radiate energy across the quiet street. Children riding bikes slowed to stare, their laughter echoing as they shouted to one another about the candy house. Some neighbors smirked, clearly amused by the audacity, while others whispered nervously, already imagining the HOA's wrath. But no one reacted more violently than Karen. The moment she stepped outside and saw the fully painted house, her face twisted into a storm of disbelief and rage. She stood frozen, binder clutched tight against her chest, as if reality itself had betrayed her. Slowly, she raised her phone, snapping picture after picture from every angle, muttering under her breath as though documenting a crime scene. Within hours, the HOA was in motion. Warning letters piled up in the homeowner's mailbox. Karen stormed from house to house, rallying support, claiming that the neighborhood's property values had dropped overnight. She cornered neighbors on sidewalks, pointing to the pink house with wild gestures, her voice growing shriller with each retelling. "It's offensive," she cried. "It violates the rules. It's destroying everything we've built." But behind her dramatic speeches was a deeper truth. Karen wasn't just angry about the color. She was furious about the loss of control. For years, she had dictated the rhythm of the neighborhood with her rules, her fines, her endless surveillance. Beige was more than paint to her, it was power. And now, standing defiantly against her, was a homeowner who had exposed the cracks in her kingdom. Karen's meltdown reached new levels when she escalated to calling emergency HOA board meetings. She marched into the clubhouse with binders, printouts of photos, and highlighted sections of the bylaws. She slammed her papers on the table, demanding immediate corrective action. Yet as the board members read the vague wording of the HOA rules, doubt crept in. Non-offensive colors was too broad. What Karen found outrageous, the law might not. Her frustration grew visible. She raised her voice, pointed fingers, and insisted that everyone hated it. But in truth, not everyone did. Quietly, some neighbors admired the boldness. A few even admitted privately that they were tired of Beige. The pink house was ridiculous, yes, but it was also refreshing. Karen refused to accept defeat. She filed official complaints with the city, demanded code enforcement intervene, and even called local reporters hoping for outrage coverage. But each attempt hit the same wall. The homeowner hadn't technically broken any laws. The house was well maintained, freshly painted, and compliant with city regulations. The HOA's vague rules couldn't override municipal authority. By the end of the week, Karen was unraveling. Her voice cracked at meetings. She stormed the sidewalks daily, binder under one arm, phone in the other, her sunglasses hiding eyes that darted nervously from house to house. And yet, every time she turned her gaze, there it was, the flaming pink house, glowing brighter in defiance with every passing sunset. It was no longer just a house. It was a symbol. A reminder that Karen's grip on the neighborhood wasn't as unshakable as she believed. And as word spread beyond the community, curious strangers began driving by, slowing down to take photos of the infamous pink house of the Beige suburb. Karen's meltdown wasn't just local anymore, it was becoming a spectacle. Chapter 4, The HOA's Counterattack. Karen's personal meltdown soon became the HOA's official crusade. The pink house, in their eyes, wasn't just a violation, it was an existential threat to their authority. The HOA board, pressured by Karen's relentless tirades, voted to escalate the matter. Letters of violation turned into certified notices, each one demanding immediate repainting under threat of escalating fines. The homeowner's mailbox filled with intimidating envelopes stamped in red. Some included photographs of the pink house taken from multiple angles, attached as evidence of noncompliance. Others included thinly veiled threats about legal consequences. But the homeowner wasn't intimidated. Every letter went into a growing binder of their own, a meticulous archive of harassment. Each document was labeled, timestamped, and filed for safekeeping. The homeowner knew the HOA was walking a dangerous line. They weren't enforcing rules, they were pushing intimidation. And intimidation, when documented, could be used against them. Still, the HOA doubled down. Karen organized rallies in the neighborhood clubhouse, painting the homeowner as a villain destroying the fabric of the community. She distributed flyers demanding residents sign a petition to force repainting. But cracks in her movement were already showing. Some neighbors privately admitted they liked the pink house, it gave the street personality. Others, though not fond of the color, were disturbed by Karen's obsession. The real escalation came when the HOA announced fines of hundreds of dollars per week, claiming the pink house violated community harmony standards. Karen herself strutted up the driveway to tape the newest violation notice to the front door, snapping photos for dramatic effect. Yet every time she tried to frame it as an open-end shut case, she ran into the same problem: the rules were vague. Non-offensive was the HOA's weakest link, and the homeowner was ready to exploit it. Behind the scenes, the homeowner consulted legal forums, researched HOA case law, and even contacted a local attorney who specialized in property disputes. The advice was clear: as long as the color didn't fall into categories of obscenity or violate city codes, the HOA had little ground to stand on. What Karen found offensive was irrelevant in the eyes of the law. But the HOA wasn't ready to let go. They scheduled an emergency hearing, summoning the homeowner to defend themselves in front of the board. Karen prepared her binder of photos and documents like it was a courtroom trial. She rehearsed her speech, convinced she'd finally corner her adversary. The day of the hearing arrived. The clubhouse filled with board members, curious neighbors, and Karen front and center, binder clutched like a weapon. The pink house loomed just outside the windows, its walls glowing under the afternoon sun, mocking every beige wall around it. The board president opened the session, reading the list of complaints. Karen leaned forward, eager to pounce. The homeowner, calm and collected, placed their own binder on the table, thicker, heavier, and meticulously organized. Inside lay every violation letter, every vague rule citation, and, most importantly, the city's written confirmation that the pink house broke no laws. The showdown was about to begin. Chapter 5, The Loophole Victory. The air inside the clubhouse was thick with tension. Karen sat at the front of the room, shoulders squared, binder open like a general preparing for battle. Around her, the HOA board members looked uneasy, their eyes flicking nervously toward the homeowner seated across from them. Outside the window, the pink house stood defiant under the afternoon sun, a silent witness to the war being waged. Karen launched into her attack first. She flipped through her binder with dramatic flair, thrusting photos of the pink house into the air as if each one were a smoking gun. She spoke of community standards, property values, and the sanctity of harmony. Her voice rose higher and higher until it cracked, but she pressed on, convinced she had the board on her side. When she finally finished, her hands trembling with adrenaline, the room fell silent. All eyes turned to the homeowner. Calmly, the homeowner slid their own binder across the table. Thicker than Karen's, it was a meticulous archive of every interaction, every violation notice, every threatening letter, every vague citation. The homeowner began with the most important piece of evidence, the HOA's own rulebook. With deliberate precision, they read aloud the clause Karen had been leaning on for weeks: homes must be painted in neutral or non-offensive colors. Then, the homeowner revealed the written response from the city planning office. The city of name does not regulate paint color for residential homes, except in cases of obscenity or public safety. Bright pink is considered legal and non-offensive under current municipal code. A ripple went through the room. Board members shifted in their chairs, suddenly less certain of their position. Karen's face turned red, her mouth opening but no words coming out. The homeowner continued, pointing out that offensiveness was subjective. For some, beige was oppressive, lifeless, and far more offensive than pink. Others found joy and beauty in color. The vagueness of the rule, they argued, made enforcement arbitrary and legally indefensible. Then came the final blow. The homeowner revealed they had already consulted a property rights attorney. If the HOA continued issuing fines, a lawsuit could be filed for harassment and abuse of authority. Every violation letter, every photo Karen had snapped, every moment of intimidation, they were all documented. If this went to court, the HOA stood to lose not only the case but also a great deal of money. The board members looked at one another, their confidence unraveling. They hadn't expected such preparation, such calm defiance. They had assumed the homeowner would be overwhelmed into compliance. Instead, they were staring at someone who had turned the HOA's own rules into a shield. Finally, the board president cleared his throat and announced that further discussion would be needed before any action could be taken. Karen erupted, slamming her binder shut and protesting furiously. But it was clear, the momentum had shifted. The homeowner walked out of the clubhouse with steady steps, their binder tucked securely under one arm. Behind them, Karen's angry voice echoed through the walls, demanding justice that was slipping further and further from her grasp. The loophole had held. The pink house stood strong, and the homeowner had scored a decisive victory. But the battle wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about triumph. And the true triumph was still to come. Chapter 6, The Pink Triumph. The days following the tense HOA meeting felt strangely quiet. No more letters appeared in the mailbox. No more threats were taped to the front door. The only sound that carried through the neighborhood was the steady hum of cars slowing down in front of the bright pink house. At first, the stares were curious, sometimes judgmental, but soon something unexpected happened. Neighbors who had once looked away began to smile as they passed. Children pointed with wide eyes, tugging at their parents' sleeves and laughing. Runners paused to take photos, and families out for evening walks lingered just a little longer in front of the glowing pink facade. The house was no longer just a home, it had become a landmark. Karen, however, did not take the shift lightly. She stormed through the cul-de-sacs, binder still clutched to her chest, muttering about community collapse and a neighborhood circus. But her words fell flat now. The board had lost its appetite for battle. The other members quietly distanced themselves from her crusade, unwilling to fuel a fight they could no longer win. The homeowner, sensing the tide had turned, decided to take things one step further. They registered their property as part of the National Colorful Homes Tour, a quirky program that highlighted uniquely painted houses across the country. Within weeks, the house was listed online, drawing curious visitors from nearby towns. Bloggers and local photographers showed up to capture the pink spectacle, sharing it across social media. What began as defiance had transformed into inspiration. Soon, other neighbors began questioning the HOA's rigid rules. One family replaced their dull beige shutters with teal. Another added a mural of wildflowers on their garage door. The sterile uniformity of the neighborhood began to crack, replaced by small bursts of individuality. And while not every change was bold, each was a quiet rebellion against the suffocating grip of conformity. Karen raged, of course. She filed new complaints, demanded emergency meetings, and even threatened to sue. But without the board's backing, her fury was powerless. She was just another voice shouting into the void. Meanwhile, the homeowner stood on their porch one evening, watching the setting sun cast a golden glow across the pink walls. For the first time in months, the air felt light, free from the weight of intimidation. What had started as punishment had become empowerment. The house, once the target of scorn, now stood as a symbol of resilience. A reminder that sometimes the rules are not as unshakable as they appear, and that a single act of defiance, painted in the brightest shade of pink, could ripple through an entire community. The HOA had demanded beige. But what they got instead was victory painted in bold, unforgettable color. The pink house stood tall, proud, and untouchable, forever marking the day the homeowner turned the HOA's control into nothing more than background noise. And from that day forward, the neighborhood would never look the same again.